after the game, this was Rob talking about whether or not he was going to retire after this season.
I'm definitely going to look at my future, for sure. I'm going to sit down the next couple of weeks and see where I'm at.
Gronk, what would make you retire?
I'm not ready for these type of questions right now. I mean, I'm just going to sit down, reflect on the season, probably talk to my teammates. We fought all year long, all the receivers, running backs, linemen. I mean, we put all the work in together. So I'm just going to reflect on the season, proud of the boys, and just see what happens.
So that was the sound of him like about retirement, but it was something he said before that caught your eye and your ear.
I was listening to it in the press conferences live after the game, and a reporter came up to him and said, "Gronk, what can you tell us about this discussion you had with some of your teammates about possibly retiring after this year?" And the first thing Gronk said is, "How did you hear about that?"
Yeah.
Now, when I heard that to me is much more compelling and interesting than, well, you know, I'm gonna think about everything. Clearly, this was something that he had discussed with some people inside that Patriots organization, be it teammates, support staff, coaches, or whatever, that he thought was a very much in private conversation.
Right.
And then the look on his face, he turned and looked at that guy and said, "How did you hear about that?" So that, to me, leads a little more credence into this. And I'll believe you. I followed this mantra from you for years.
Right.
Remember when Brett Favre retired?
Yes.
And you said to me after that whole thing, never listen to a guy with what he says the first few weeks after a season's over, because you're just spent emotionally, physically drained, you're beat up, you're not in a mindset where you can think about, okay, let's gear up and do this again. But I thought when you put in context that first, how did you hear about that? In other words, I was absolutely talking about that with someone before this game. Does that change the context for you at all?
Not a ton, but it certainly raises an eyebrow. And I don't think there's any doubt, based off some of the injuries he's had and then a concussion 2 weeks ago.
Big one.
And you heard, I believe it was Rodney Harrison in pregame talking about how Gronk had kind of changed this season. He wasn't going to be drinking or partying during the season. He had gotten on some of the TB12 nutrition thing going on and tried to take care of his body a little bit better. And you know, certainly he got nicked up some, but with a concussion for sure. I think that may have added to it. We know the amount of surgeries he's had, you know, especially on his back. And then that concussion, that stung him pretty good, no doubt about it. So maybe it was in his mind. And then, but let me tell you, so I'll give you a little bit on that, yes. But anything anybody gets asked right after the Super Bowl about their future, man, do I put away. I just put away and say, you got to give that time, let that wear off a little bit to see where it goes. But that's why we put Gronk in the poll, because of his answer to that and just what you had said about how did you hear about that there was some discussion. So that's why, again, who is least likely to be with their team next year? Belichick, Brady, Gronk, or Nick Foles?
Well, it's interesting, too, because, you know, Gronk is an interesting study. I mean, we all look at him, oh, look at that big, dumb party animal. That's really not who he is. I mean, let me be clear.
Yeah.
He goes hard and he enjoys it.
Yes.
I'm not saying that at all, but, you know, he doesn't spend a dime of his NFL money. He has lived, as long as he's played in the NFL, he's lived off his endorsements.
Right.
He has banked all that cash. He's won the Good Guy Award for the Patriots, I think, a couple of times for all the hard work he does that we don't see and we don't talk about. He spends off days at hospitals dealing with sick children. He does all of those things. So you may look at him, and I call him the dancing bear that was put together in a lab, but he has a plan. And I think he's really thinking about that plan going forward in terms of, hey, man, I'm only 29. I've got all this money in the bank. I want to make sure that when it's all said and done, I got a life after my career is over.
So that one was a little surprising. Not surprising at all that the 40-year-old Tom Brady was asked after the game about his future as well.
And again, what makes Gronk's answer interesting right after the game is listen to how Tom Brady addressed that issue when he will be 41 going into next season.
I expect to be back, so we'll see. I mean, it's 15 minutes after the game ended, so I'd like to process this a little bit, and I wouldn't see why I wouldn't be back.
So just the difference in those two answers, all right? And your point is well taken, and we talked about it a million times. I mean, Peyton Manning, we all knew he was going to retire, but he didn't get there till March. So it takes some people to get there. But just in the way that Brady answered that question and diffused it for the most part right away, as opposed to Gronk's, how did you hear about that? And I'm thinking about everything. I mean, that's a pretty big dichotomy between those two answers.
I agree. And listen, the only way Brady, and we heard it before when the Crafts have basically said Tom Brady has earned the right to retire when he wants. So if Brady wants to play, he's going to be back, and it's going to be with the Patriots. If either one of the Brady or Belichick was going to be gone, it was going to be Belichick by getting traded somewhere. I don't think that's going to happen. Gronk, now that you threw that into the fray. So then that brings up our other choice there, Nick Foles.
Yep.
Nick Foles has another year in his contract, so if he's going anywhere, it's going to be because Philadelphia gets offered a deal that they can't refuse. Everybody has a price. Will some team now match the price again? Remember, the greatest conversation that saved this season and put Nick Foles in the category of Jeff Hostetler and Doug Williams as quarterbacks making 3 or fewer regular season starts and winning the Super Bowl was a conversation Jeffrey Lurie, the owner, and Howie Roseman, the GM, had before the season saying, is $12 million, do we spend that on the backup quarterback, or can we use that money somewhere else? And they obviously made the right decision in spending it on Foles. Now, do other teams come a knocking? What do they offer? And trade as Nick Foles end up getting traded by the Eagles?
Well, listen, I understand the speculation because he played great. And again, he's on a short list that has Brady, Montana, and a few other quarterbacks as back-to-back 350-yard passing games in playoff games in NFL history. But at the end of the day, Carson Wentz tore up that knee in late November. And what do we always say about an ACL, unless you're Adrian Peterson and you're not human? It takes a year. I mean, even when RG3, who tore it up in the playoff game against the Seahawks, tried to come back for the start of 2013, he wasn't ready. He wasn't right. So if you're the Eagles, you have the ultimate security blanket in Nick Foles.
I agree with that.
And look, you're right. Everybody has a price.
Yep.
That price would have to be so freaking over the top for me. Look, in this system, and that is the biggest part of this. In this system, it works for Nick Foles. When he was thinking about not playing football at all after a couple of bad years, he said he wanted to go back only because he wanted to work with Andy Reid. Well, who was Andy Reid's disciple? Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson was on Andy Reid's staff in Kansas City, and that's where these people all got to back and work together. The reason Nick Foles wanted to come back was because it wasn't Andy Reid, but it was Doug Peterson, and Doug Peterson had Andy Reid's system. This system is perfect for Nick Foles. When Carson Wentz is healthy, he's good. Let's just dispel that right now. There is no quarterback.
No, there is
that is not going to happen. No. But why would you, if you're the Eagles, seeing how valuable this guy is as a backup quarterback, especially in the system you have and in a place where he's very comfortable, I mean, the price that you'd even have to think about it would be astronomical to think about trading him away.
And yet, there's a price out there. There's a price out there because you'll always answer the phone. You'll always listen. And it is a court with free agency and the draft. But we already saw Alex Smith get traded and what that trade went for. This is a Super Bowl winning quarterback who played well, certainly well in the postseason, and now is available. I understand what you're saying, and I'm with you. You have no idea how Carson Wentz is coming back from it. Carson Wentz is your starting quarterback. You don't know how he's coming back from it. Foles is 7.6 against the cap next year,
which is such a manageable number.
Nothing. So obviously, if he got traded somewhere else, he would certainly want to do an extension and all that. But he can get traded somebody else. The price would have to be a very high. And you know what? It might be. There may be some team out there that says, we're going to buy into that. We think we're getting close right now, and if we can get a guy who has this ability, then we think we can now. That's taking chances. We'll see, because you said with systems and such, because at one point we had always said any quarterback that did well in New England outside of Tom Brady that showed a little bit and then all of a sudden went somewhere else and got a lot of money, never really panned out. There's no quarterback that left New England that has a better than 500 record. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo may go past that because he's played well, but certainly when Matt Castle left and any of the other guys like a Brian Hoyer went somewhere and such, so it's never really panned out. So you're taking a chance because, you look at Nick Foles after his 27 touchdowns and 2 interception season, then it was 13-10, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, when he was playing for Philly that's a year after and then St. Louis. So it wasn't always this wow stuff.
No.
So what would somebody be willing to trade for him, and what's the price where Philadelphia would say yes?
Well, the reason why I'm inclined to say that they won't is because of the point you brought up at the beginning of this conversation. People are like, really? Are you investing that much money in your backup?
Yep.
I think they invested. If that's the way you approach this season, and it played out that you needed him, and it's a pretty cap-friendly deal. I mean, I look, knowing that you got a guy coming off the ACL, knowing what you have in this guy, knowing that you were willing to invest in him when you didn't know how good he was going to be on this current Philadelphia team, it would just seem to me, if I'm Howie Roseman, who, by the way, was the executive of the year in the NFL, and Doug Peterson, who clearly now has some sway with some things he might want to say about, let's keep these guys, let's let these guys go, I would be hard-pressed to say, yeah, they'd be willing to let him go for the right price when they know what a commodity he is.
Agreed. What's the price?
What?
Because you know it's there.
Jimmy was a second.
Right.
Yeah.
But as Nick was playing, how much did the trade value change as he was going up and up and up the poll and what he was doing, and now he's a Super Bowl MVP?